And now that I have my composition with all my little clips all lined up correctly and the correct audio, I want to add a little bit of animation. So where Jeremy, for example, says, okay, we need to mark the back of the mirror, there is a part in which he says, and now we're going to do this. In fact, maybe I should have you see it. Sorry, I'm zoomed in very close because I want to make sure I get the line precisely where it needs to be. But let's watch this part really quick so you know why I'm adding a line there.
The first thing we want to notice is that the mirror that we're using is a second surface mirror. That means that the actual reflective surface is along the back, not along the front. So what we need to do then is we need to mark the back of where the mirror is.
So you see why I want to add actually some lines there to make those marks more visible, because they're pretty darn small right there. So one way to create these lines is to create a small animation with a line growing, and getting to the right location, for example. So one way to do it is to go under File and New and Legacy Title. Control T is also the shortcut. And I'm going to leave it Title 2. By default, it's actually Title 1, but I did it earlier just to play with it. And here we are, and that's why it's Title 2. So this interface shows up. And in this interface, you can select the line tool, and you can go where you want the line to show up and draw your line right here. Now, I don't like it white because the background is white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up a little bit more. And every time you have to do something to make sure this is visible, it tends to be quite pinched. I don't know why, it always shows up pinched. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to change the color to red, the C with 5 zeros. And I'm going to make it a little bit thicker. So where it says line width, I'm going to go in and make it maybe more like, I can make it like 8, for example. So now my line is thicker and is a bright red. That should really help. So now I can close it right here. Seems like nothing happened, but what it did happen is my line is created right here. So what I can do at this point is I can click it and drag it right here where my playback head is, because that's where I want my line to appear. So what if I want that line to also animate? So one way to do that is to, at this point, I'm going to zoom even closer. I'm going to go at 50%. I'm going to click on my line, actually double click on my line, and I see my usual effect controls. Now notice I could also have clicked down here, either way, on the composition or on the timeline, as long as it's highlighted. Now I get into this situation, and what I could do is, now I need to point out something very important. This is a mini timeline, right? It's just the length of that little, I don't want it to be there for too long, so I'm fine that it's so small. Let me zoom in to show you what I mean with small. It doesn't last very long into the timeline. One thing important to say that I didn't at the beginning, and is very key, is if I want it to be longer, do you see this little arrow that shows up that goes one direction or the other? Oops, it's hard, or the other. So if I click and drag to the left, it will make it shorter. If I click and drag to the right, it will make it longer. So it's up to me how I want it. But also remember, these clips can kind of go, bigger or smaller. And in fact, if you do it to a clip that you cut prior, and you extend it, what you'll see is that your cut actually gets pushed forward. My point is, even when you create a cut in your clip is still there and alive. You just are showing a little piece of it. So in the minute in which you go in with this little icon, with this red arrow that shows up, and drag it out, and I'm not going to do it right here because it's already tied together nicely. But remember that if you select a certain clip, and you, in fact, actually there is a clip out there, there's a little bit loose that I can do it with right here. Do you see this clip at the very end of my timeline in this point? Let me go there right now. So this is a short clip, let me go and say fit, in which Jeremy says, and this is our setup, right? And then it disappears, goes away. His hands go away, and then we see Jeremy say goodbye. But if I was to grab that clip with his hands, notice his hands All right. Let me actually show you that little clip so you know what's going on. I actually do, but I think you should see it.
This is our setup for the ray tracing exercise. You'll be able to download this exact diagram of pins and trace the points yourself.
So as you can see, his hands here just show, open up onto the table. So what happens if right here the hands go away and I got just the table like that? Now, if I actually grab the end of this and I drag it all the way to the end of my clip, now what I will see is I'll just see this table all the way to the end of my movie instead of seeing Jeremy's face coming back to us.
You'll be able to download this exact diagram of pins and trace the points yourself.
So you know what I mean here, that your clips, even once you cut them, are still alive. In fact, this clip up here starts with his hands, right? Opening up. But if I actually grab it right here and I extend it the opposite direction, you see, I see actually him marking the pins, what was before that moment. So keep in mind that in Adobe Premiere, whenever you cut your clip, that doesn't mean, and you hit that delete for the part that you don't want, that doesn't mean that part is completely gone. It can come back if you use this little trick of pulling and pushing, depending on which direction you go, onto your little snippet. So you're enlarging the snippet, making it, bigger and revealing more of the overall clip. So keep that in mind, but let's go back to my line right here. And again, I don't want the line to stay too long because those lines are interesting, but they're not that interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make that title with the line a tiny bit shorter. I'm going to move my timeline here so I see it. So I see my line showing up, and then you see he turns the board. So I actually want it really to fade out pretty quickly. It means when he starts turning, by this point, the line should be fading out. So I'm going to actually grab it. Again, let me zoom onto it, grab this point, and move it in. So I want really my line to show up when I need it, and then go away pretty quick. Okay. So I could also animate it if I want. I was actually at the animation, but I had to do a little digression with telling you the clips are still, something you can continue to edit. They're, in quote, a live creature that can continuously change even after you cut it and stuff. So what you can do here is, okay, well, I want to animate it. So obviously your best bet is to use the effect controls that allows you to edit whatever clip you have selected. And what I could say is okay, what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually scale it. For example, say, at the beginning of my timeline right here, my scale is 0. That means I don't see my line, right? So right now I don't see my line. In fact, sorry, let me zoom a little bit closer so you see what I mean. And once you said, okay, at the beginning of my timeline, the scale is 0, you need to create a keyframe. So you need to record this change, this thing that you just did. And this little stopwatch is what is the element that allows you to set that key that says at this moment, I am 0, right? So I'm going to say, there we are. And this is that keyframe I was talking about. But then I want to go to the end of my line. And at that point, I want to say I want to be 100%. Oops, sorry, there we are. So now I have 2 keyframes, one at the beginning and one that gets recorded automatically at the end. So let me actually pull this down so we see what's going on. Let's move this. And you can see that my line shows up, and I can make it show up in so many different ways. I can make it, for example, grow from here out, and in this case I need to uncheck that uniform scale and do some more maneuvers. But for the moment, what I want to show you is this idea that you easily can create an element and then use this effect control to play with it and animate it however you want it to be. Let's say we're happy with this animation just for the time being, so I don't drag this tutorial to last too long. So I want this line to eventually fade out, right? Disappear slowly and gently. I don't want it to just be something abrupt like that, right? So what I'm going to do is, and actually, you know what, Yeah, it's fine. It's good enough. I mean, I'm not too happy with it. I would want to make it grow from here, but let's actually, as I said, try to not make this tutorial last forever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a crossfade. So I'm going to go on dissolve, and I'm going to say I want it to cross dissolve at the end. I want it to end with a cross dissolve. Now the problem is the cross dissolve takes the whole length of the clip, the animation that I don't want to. So what I need to do, I need to wait that I get the right symbol, and then I'm going to basically make the cross dissolve start halfway. So now when I play this, I'm going to hit play.
Need to mark.
And in fact, I think it's staying too little. Now I need to really make it a little bit, stay a little bit longer because it's really short, I notice. And again, I want my cross dissolve to kind of be a little bit smaller. So let me play it again.
Need to mark.
And maybe now it's a tiny bit, needs to be tweaked a little bit more. Now, the animation part here needs to be kind of a lot of tweaking generally when I do animation in Adobe Premiere. Takes some tweaking. Okay, now it's better. So you can see what I mean, that you can easily create a line, and now we can create another one on the other side, or we can copy this one and manipulate the animation. But that's how you create an animation in Adobe Premiere. Pretty much you create a new, a new legacy title. And by the way, the legacy title can also contain text. So I'm going to say okay right now. And you can go in here and you can type, for example, part 3 of the tutorial as an example. And you obviously can highlight it. And I told you the story that this interface is always a little bit pinched. I'm not sure why it comes out like that, but it does. So I'm going to make sure I reveal it because I want to edit that text. I don't want the text to look like that. So I can go in here and obviously change the font to be something else, whatever I like. I'm not sure which one I like best here. I'm kind of picky about fonts, so maybe again, in the intent of trying not to drag this too long, I am going to use Palatino. There's actually a pretty good font. I like quite a bit. And you can decide, the cap size, what you want it to be. You can decide the font size. You might want it a little bit bigger. See right here. Oops. So you can decide the color you want. You might say, I want kind of a nice bright blue, and say, okay. Blue actually was not going to stand out against the black, so it was probably not the best decision. Sorry. Let's go with a color I love that is orange. But you get the message. Here you can pretty much create your whatever element you want. Then you can close it. And now we have this title 3 that we can drag onto my timeline. And there it is now. I can see it. And I can obviously, again, animate it. Say, look, I'm going to grab onto that title 3. And again, you can select it on here and you'll see that your effect control shows up, or you can select it on here. And you can, by the way, when you select it on here, you can kind of allow it to move a little bit if you want, or if you cannot, because font is oftentimes really thin, you can change the position this way. You can say, you know what, I actually wanted to move it up and down, up or down. So that's one way to go. You can decide that you want it maybe down here, even though it's where it's going to be least visible because the color doesn't stand out against the skin tone and the table. But you can obviously change it here, and then you can kind of, for example, animate the opacity. You can say, look, I want at first this to be at 50% opacity, for example. So you might want to go in here and click and drag and say, okay, at the very beginning, I want it to be at 50% about, and I'm going to key that. And then at the very end, I want it to be at 100%. I know it's not a fancy animation here, sorry, but just to show you that you can do that. You can basically have the title go from 50 to 100% at this point, and you can decide how long you want it to last across the timeline. So that's how you do animation in Adobe Premiere. You go into the legacy title, decide which assets you want to bring in, if it's fonts, if it's line, if it's shapes, and then you pretty much animate it through the effect controls. So the last step is, how do I export this? How do I make that pretty much my Adobe Premiere project that now looks perfect on my timeline, and my composition is totally the way I want it. By the way, let me actually delete these legacy titles. It's really easy to do. You can just hit delete on the keyboard, and I'm going to leave actually the title 2 with the line, because that was actually something that I considered even before that today's tutorial. I thought would be kind of cool to put a line there to highlight it, even though I don't like how it's animated, so I will change that eventually. But anyway, so what you want to do right now is you want to export your video, right? So what you want to do is go in File, Export, Media. And it should kick in. Sorry, it's taking a minute. And right here, you decide where to save it. Like right now, it's called Composite Enrica. So you would want to click on that and say, okay, where do I save it? I'm going to save it, for example, on my desktop. And I have there something called Tutorial for Jeremy right here. And I'm going to call it Composite Enrica. Is totally fine. I'm going to say save, but at least you browse to where you want it to show up. You want video and audio. This is a great format. You can decide which format. Each of these would have different properties, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but definitely H.264 is highly recommended. QuickTime is highly recommended too, by the way, but let's leave it to this one. And then down here, you have many different properties that you can choose, obviously. This is the size of your video, for example. This is what my video is currently. It's 1080 by 608. Actually, is it? I forget. I think it's, I'm going to say match source. Yeah, sorry. I remember that it was 3840 by 2160. So sorry about that. I forgot for a second. So you want to say match source if you want to export it at that. Obviously, you can use a smaller, resolution if you want to. But like the 1080 was smaller, would have obviously rendered much faster. Also, you can decide if you want software encoding or hardware encoding. Software encoding will do a better compression. Also down here, you have more settings. The default is only one pass. I suggest 2 passes. It will give you a better result. And you want to, if you're doing VR, that I do a lot, you want to make sure you check VR. This is not VR, so doesn't make any sense. Now, sorry, because my screen cuts it out, but down here, it will say add to a media encoder queue. And what it'll do is it will launch media encoder and render your video. Sorry, that is down here. I'm actually not going to do it right now because I don't want to wait for media encoder to kick in. That takes quite a while, so I'm going to actually close it. So that's kind of how you can eventually also export your video in Adobe Premiere.